when the Congress passes 22 anti-Semitism resolutions in the last few years, and there's still a lot of problems in America that are totally unaddressed, and they're getting worse, you turn people radical. Where does this go? I'm worried that the contradictions are too obvious, the lies are too transparent. This is too insulting.
So recently, Tucker Carlson had a podcast where he talks about how identity politics has corrupted the right, even after some people on the right have spent the last few years raking the left over the coals over issues like DEI and wokeness, and what this means for Trump's coalition, for the right in general, and the future of right-leaning politics. This is in a context of a conversation with Saagar and Enjeti, so let's get their take on this, and please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
The current Trump administration is suing, using the Civil Rights Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, Harvard University for not protecting Jewish students under the indifferent standard. Now, that same standard was used for some of the worst excesses in the 1970s and others of the civil rights. These are things we're supposed to be against. This is DEI, run amok. And yet we're watching this happen in our own government. And I don't see, there's so many people, Ben Shapiro.
There are a lot of bias against Jewish students at Harvard?
Oh, no.
Underrepresented?
Not last time I checked.
I guess what I object to is lying, of course, above all, but also I object to these kinds of identity politics.
Exactly.
I thought the whole point was we're Americans by citizenship.
Yes.
Citizenship matters, as it did in Rome. It did. Paul's on trial in Rome, and he's like, hey, I'm a Roman citizen. They're like, whoa, they back right off, because that really meant something.
And should be.
It should mean something, I think. And they're continuing in this weird leftist frame where certain people have more rights than other people.
That's right. And that's what we're watching.
I just couldn't object to that more.
Absolutely. You're seeing this play out just like it did among establishment liberals that talked about, hey, there needs to be special carve-outs and quotas at universities and such, and safe spaces, by the way, in universities for, marginalized groups. Well, the right has co-opted that strategy and aimed it only toward, Jewish students, and pretended that, there's just this rise of anti-Semitism, this wake of violence that's flown from it. And these students are uniquely endangered, so they need to be, given more privileges, safe spaces, what have you, right? But this is DEI. It's just tuned to a different direction. And you're seeing this on the right, for sure. And you're seeing it with free speech laws, too, and hate speech laws that are being rewritten to conflate anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism. Like if you have a minor criticism of Israel, you're often called an anti-Semite, and the laws in some states, including Georgia and Arizona, have been rewritten to some extent to facilitate this mentality. It's absolutely crazy. It's something that the right should see coming from a mile away and reject outright. So I'm glad these two are talking about it.
And every American should. And look, you may not like these people. I probably wouldn't get along with a lot of these people. No. But let's sit here and talk about Harvard, like you said. To watch, literally, it's been 10 years ago. I was sitting with my friends in the Daily Caller office, which you were very kind to hire me into, and we were watching Ben Shapiro humiliate Trigglypuff, right? We were watching leftist students get triggered and cry when Ben Shapiro would visit campus, and we thought it was hilarious.
Yeah.
10 years later, I watched students literally crying at a podium with the House of Representatives Speaker Mike Johnson next to them, talking about how I didn't feel safe while I was on campus. And it's like, well, why didn't you feel safe? Because people were shouting slogans of, again, protesting a foreign government. Now, that's actually a lot more about the psychology of you. But regardless, did we not live through a decade of snowflake and fuck your feelings? Because I was there for that. And I'm not going to sit here and watch people who made millions of dollars, Shapiro and Dave Rubin and all these other people, making fun of leftist students, only to co-opt the same level of identity politics.
That's exactly what happened. You saw this play out with a lot of these figures on the right, the Shapiros and Rubins of the world. There's some others that essentially made careers out of this. Charlie Kirk, too. I don't think Charlie Kirk is as rigid on his stances, against anti-Semitism, hate speech laws, and stuff like that. But the point remains, this is a trajectory that we're on, and Saagar's exactly right. You see these people twisting it, co-opting it, using it in the same direction with the same frame, but just in a different realm. in terms of trying to combat anti-Semitism. And again, they twist that too by saying, hey, if you criticize Israel, that's anti-Semitism. A lot of them certainly do that. I mean, all dissidents know that if you criticize U.S. foreign policy or U.S. aid to Israel, things like that, you are innately called an anti-Semite, and they don't spare their wrath on just people that aren't Jews. You know, they call the Norm Finkelsteins of the world and the Glenn Greenwalds of the world and the Max Blumenthals of the world and the Jeffrey Sachs of the world anti-Semitic too for doing the same thing. So you are seeing this on the right, even after they campaigned against violations of free speech. They said, hey, and rightly so, Kamala Harris and John Kerry and Hillary Clinton and others prior to the election, Tim Walz, were saying, hey, we need to police more hate speech on the internet. There's too much hate speech and anti-Semitism. And they said, that's bogus. That's an insane argument. But here they are in power now. And it sure looks like they're trying to police some of what they're calling hate speech.
And like you said about Harvard, okay, like, and this is important. What is the problem with Harvard? To me, the problem of Harvard is it took our most elite institute, Harvard is, the whole Ivy League, our most elite students, it crippled them with debt, and 41% of graduates now work in finance, consulting, and tech. Okay, some of the worst industries that are directly extractive of the American consumer, basically getting rich on their backs, addicting them to crippling financial products, technology, I don't even know what a lot of people in consulting do. Apparently, they make a lot of money doing it. Is that a productive industry for our country?
No.
And then Harvard University admitted the same, actually less students in the class of 2023 than it did in 1981. The U.S. population has grown 110 million since that point. Now, why do they do that? It's for ultra exclusivity. It's to jack up, prices for their tuition. So
they admitted fewer students than in 81?
Than in 81. And the U.S. population has grown 110 million since that point.
Has their administrative staff grown?
Oh, of course. And but actually, you're not even asking the right question. What about?
That always grows, just like government office and bureaucracies. Certainly always grows, never contracts, no matter who's in power, who's the administrator at the time. That is what happens.
About their endowment fund. They're basically a private equity firm with a small education department. And, they lobby against the endowment tax through Congress. The endowment tax says, hey, increase your student body size relative to your endowment, and you don't have to pay any tax. But they don't do that because it's all about artificial constraints, saddling these kids up with debt, basically taking the best and brightest of the United States of America and turning them into cogs of of managerial capitalism. That is not the Harvard University of the early, let's say, the World War II period. That is not the MIT. They're all doing the same thing. Those universities were our crown jewel and got government money from them so that they could set up and go work in industries that were productive and beneficial to our country. That's my current critique of Harvard. I think that's one most Americans would agree with. I think
that's fair, probably, no matter what your stance is on these issues in the macro sense. That just totally makes sense to me.
That's my critique of higher education in general. It's not the Middle Eastern Studies Department, okay? It's not suing them under the Civil Rights Act. And to watch this weaponization right now, by Pam Bondi.
It's such a lie.
It is a lie.
I mean, if you really want to play like the demographics game and who's getting shafted and who gets into Harvard actually?
Yeah, that's right. Let's take a look.
Let's see the numbers. And does that reflect the U.S. population?
No.
In fact, let's get even radical on the subject. Let's measure it against IQ tests.
Yeah.
No,
right.
I'm serious.
Yeah.
It's not, you can say, well, the American population is not all qualified to go to Harvard. Okay, great. So how about let's use SAT scores as a proxy for IQ. Is Harvard letting in the smartest people?
No. In fact, there is a concerted effort right now to drop or abandon SAT or any other quantitative measure, specifically, to enshrine more of this DEI style regime.
So
there's no question about that. And if I had one major critique about government-run education and systems in which government have a monopoly on education, it's that their admissions will not be fair in terms of what will produce the best students who are most qualified to become part of the institution, who are most qualified to become students and then learn and go on to fruitful careers. Instead, we find that private enterprises and private institutions only exist for profit. And, a lot of people look at that like that's a bad thing, but you can't achieve profit in a free society unless you're serving others. Unless others get some benefit from it, I'm not getting paid at whatever I do. The same is true in other regards. Now, government has perverted that, right? They've given subsidies and trade privileges, and in terms of education, monopolies on education, where they make it almost impossible for parents to send their students to private schools in many cases because, hey, they don't have the money for it, and their money is going to fruitless government schools. That is what you get ultimately from any state-controlled institution, and you're seeing it in higher education. And I use higher education loosely here.
It's actually getting discriminated against here.
Exactly.
Right?
And so then...
It's too much, though. Like, I don't even want to have that conversation. I know the answer because I know the numbers, which I'm not going to repeat here. But because I don't want to add to the identity politics stuff, because I think it's a dead end.
That's not what we're about.
I don't want to be about that.
We want to live in a more equitable country.
They're
That's
pushing
it.
us toward it.
Yeah.
But the problem is when you lie that aggressively and you use my government to do it and all of its armed institutions to do it, then you force me. You're making people radical with the stuff.
Yes, and they should be. I mean,
I don't want radicalism, but they're forcing when the DOJ, when the Congress passes 22 anti-Semitism resolutions in the last few years, and there's still a lot of bias in America, and there's still a lot of problems in America that are totally unaddressed, and they're getting worse. You turn people radical.
Yeah, when getting into these identity politics, instead of focusing on the problems that befall all of us, the value of the dollar, the debt, whether we can afford college for our children or our medical bills, those are issues that affect everyone. And then you just turn people against each other in a divide and conquer approach when you make things about DEI and identity politics. Well, the only identity that matters to me is the individual identity and individual rights, which require being held onto in a free society if you're supposed to exercise them in any major way. So I'm with Tucker here. It's often said that, people that condemn U.S. foreign policy toward Israel and such are obsessed with Israel. Ted Cruz tried to say that, minutes after he said, I made it my quest to be the most pro-Israel senator ever in Congress. A lot of people say that, but then, it's them that are focused on, twisting DEI to fit the benefit of, just Jewish people. It's crazy. There's no reason to do this other than you're just selectively introducing DEI in ways that you want.
I'm worried about that.
One of those resolutions they passed through the House actually conflated anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism, which is, they're literally saying it is anti-Semitic, as in...
It is a crime to criticize a foreign country.
A foreign country, or even an ideology which believes in the existence
Why are they doing
of
this?
a foreign country.
Why are they doing this?
Well, I mean, look...
It's bonkers, man. It's bonkers.
It's beyond bonkers, and I wish money were the answer. I'm not saying it isn't just a critical part of it.
I agree.
It is a part of just this propagandistic campaign to convince that this is our greatest ally, that actually we would die before we would let any of them die. And a lot of it is enshrined, unfortunately, in like a bastardization of Christian and rabbinical theology, as Ted Cruz revealed. I mean, actually, what really revealed to me was he didn't even really know what he was saying, he was quoting.
He had no idea.
But he was taught
he didn't know what
he was
book it was in.
Parrot. But that's a legitimate belief. I mean,
it's in the Bible.
Right. That's how we end up with Brian Mast wearing the uniform of a foreign country in my Congress.
And Brian Mast also posted on Twitter that there's no such thing as an innocent Palestinian. That's an elected official. That's what these people are saying. They represent you, right? And that's what we're getting out of this whole Israel first mentality that isn't even so hidden anymore. And Saagar's exactly right. These laws that are being drawn up are only to divide people. That's their only result. We saw that in the left-wing version of this. This is just the red-flavored version of left-wing wokeness and woke carve-outs for DEI. We're seeing it play out right in front of our eyes. And, it's inescapable. It's going to infect the right unless people reject this mentality instead of co-opting it for their own strategy. But, Republicans are often conserving what the left does. They've done it in many cases. You don't see any conservatives talking about eliminating Social Security anymore, or Medicare, or any of the entitlement programs that came out of the Great Society or the New Deal, certainly so. They didn't even repeal Obamacare right after they tried to repeal it under Obama, they sent him lots of bills that he vetoed. And the moment they got into power with both houses of Congress and Trump under his first presidency, they didn't do any such thing. So you're seeing the same thing. They just adopt the tactics and the platform and the policy at times and just redirect it in ways that they like, that suits their interests.
And that's what offends me more than anything is the only uniform, in my opinion, that a United States Congress person should ever wear is that of the United States of America.
Well, yeah, and I would say to the, to MAGA voters, this is the program we voted for, the one that puts our country where we were born at the center of the conversation, at the top of the priority list.
Yes.
So those are the rules. So anyway, where does this go? I'm worried that the contradictions are too obvious. The lies are too transparent. This is too insulting. I can't even deal with it. I feel like I'm the least radical person I know. I'm happy to not talk about certain subjects just so we can all get along. I'm a WASP in the end. I don't want conflict, okay?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Tucker. And the interesting thing here is what he's saying rings true regardless of what your own preferences are in terms of domestic politics and domestic policy. Like, I know that I have, different policy preferences in some areas than Tucker, for sure, especially on economics and things like that. But even just the notion of focusing inward first, rather than problems throughout the world, boogeymen throughout the world, that would go a long way in America. If more Americans, regardless of ideology, did that, and you are seeing that on the populist left and populist right, I think that's a good thing. The real America first mentality, not the Israel first mentality that so many in the political establishment, pretend is just a lie, but then all of their policy preferences somehow conform to the direct preferences of Netanyahu. That's exactly what we see. So, if we focused inward more, I think we would at least have the decency to confront some of the challenges to regular Americans rather than compounding them through foreign wars, which have, sweeping ramifications on debt and inflation and costs and bloodshed, all sorts of things.
I know everyone thinks I hate conflict actually, but they're forcing this on all of us. And I feel like the system is breaking as a result.
Yeah.
Do you feel that?
I do. And the reason, I don't think Marx actually said it, but in accelerationism, it's about heightening the contradictions.
Yes.
It's a Marxian theory. And in a way, I do think that that's what they're doing to all of us is they're forcing people who are sympathetic, who want to see our country first, who reject a lot of the premises of the left, spent a decade of our lives. In my case, you've spent multiple decades of your life fighting against many of these forces, which we found repulsive, which we blame for the destruction of our country, and then watching that get hijacked. And again, maybe I'm the fool. There was plenty of evidence it could go this way. I didn't think it would. I didn't think in particular it would go this far. But it's one of those where the breaking is happening at a voter level, and in particular in the platform that you and I are speaking right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Saagar and Tucker are generally right here. We are seeing this play out on the right now, where there are obvious critics of Israel on the right, more so than probably any time in my life. I think rightly so, based upon what's happening in Gaza, the genocide that's being bankrolled by the U.S., the U.S. shelving its ostensible, foreign policy aims to normalize relations with Iran on behalf of Israel to then bomb Iran through this secret stealth attack, which set us back immensely. Trump's trying to celebrate that, but now if I'm an Iranian, I want to acquire a nuclear weapon. That's the lesson from all this. And I'm sick of being bullied by the biggest bullies on the block. And, the U.S. had to rely on Iranian restraint to stop that from being a regime change war. We're seeing this play out amongst the influencers that are calling people like Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson and Dave Smith woke right. But what's so ironic about that is they're literally using the same tactics that woke liberals did to shut down any legitimate criticism of a topic. This time it's just with Israel. That's the only thing the people that they call woke right have in common, really, is that they're critics of Israel or U.S. policy toward Israel. They happen to actually have questions or concerns about giving Israel a blank check to do whatever it wants in the Middle East, when Americans have their own problems to deal with and their own solutions that they desire for their own domestic problems. That's the only thing they use, the criteria that they use to label people woke right. Well, I think that's a pretty woke tendency, using anti-Semitism as a bludgeon, the same way that left-wing wokesters used racism or sexism or homophobia as bludgeons against conversations that, you know, are not very acceptable to the mainstream and mainstream opinion. But what do you think? Let me know down below. Are Tucker and Saagar right about this? To what extent has identity politics and wokeness infected the right? And do you see any way of getting around this outside of, you know, the right somehow gravitating toward one of these two viewpoints? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Tucker's too. This was an awesome conversation. And please consider becoming a YouTube member by clicking the join button below. You will support me financially, but in doing so, you also will have access to all my videos in advance of their real-time YouTube release for the general public. So until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.